Imagine how his brothers were treating them. He already knew they hated him. He already knew what he was going to do. He already knew he will come back to a very hostile environment. But you know what he said? He said, yes. No excuse. He didn't say, oh man, I don't feel like it. He didn't say, I don't want to deal with them. He didn't say, why don't you send somebody else? He didn't say, I've done it enough times already. He didn't say, why does it have to be me every single time? Yeah. Which one of these is you? Ooh. Or is it all of them? Good afternoon, church. My name is Obaid, and I'm from Pakistan. That's the first thing that defines me when people look at me, right? They're like, oh, he's from either Pakistan or India, mostly Pakistan, I guess. I think I love my people, I love my country, but ever since I was in Pakistan, ever since I was a teenager, there was one thing that was in my head and in my mind, and that's something that I was obsessed over. You know what the thing was? I want to be out of Pakistan. Which is not uncommon for a lot of people, right? If you grow up in the third world, all you want to do is go to another country for a better life. Come on. So what I did, I was like, okay, there's no possibilities for me here. None of my family members have been overseas. So what should I do? What is it that I have? I was like, you know what? I can study pretty well, and maybe that's what I can do, and that's my way out. So you know what I did? As soon as I finished my high school, I spent 4 years of my life working really, 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 and really hard. I studied all day, all night, didn't go to any events, didn't have a social life, didn't do anything at all but study. Wow. Why? Because I was actually preparing for this scholarship. So this scholarship is called a Fulbright scholarship, and basically what it does, it lets you study in the US. And that was my dream. That is what I had done everything in my life for. I used to go to sleep at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. sometimes in the morning, wake up at 8 or 9 a.m. and then go to uni and restart the process again and again. I was so focused, I was laser focused on that objective, on that goal, because I knew that was my ticket out of Pakistan. Kept on doing that, kept on working hard. I got all the grades, I was at the top of my class in my bachelor's degree. I took this test called GRE, I scored really, really well on that. I scored really high on my TOEFL exams, which is an English language exam. I spoke to a couple of my other colleagues who have been to the US, and they studied at really good universities, and they said, dude, you have better scores than me, you have better GPA than me, surely you will get it. Guess what happened? Sad story, sad story. So what happened that while I was doing all that, preparing for all that, I applied for it. I went to the interviews and I was like myself, I was joking around in the interviews, having an amazing conversation with all the interviewers. So I think just to give you the scale of like how God was taking me through the process is, I think each year like 10 to 20,000 people apply for it and only 200 people get shortlisted. So the success rate is really high and only like 50 or 60 get the scholarship. So I had made it past to the 200 stage, which is pretty impressive. So I was really, really happy about that. I had an amazing interview and then it was the waiting game. So you know what I did? I waited, and waited even more, and nothing happened. Finally got a bit frustrated and got a bit impatient, so you know what I said? What I'll do is I'll call them up. I called them up and I was like, hey, I had this interview, I did all that, but I haven't heard back. And I still remember the words that the lady on the phone said me, and then my heart just dropped. You know what she said? She said, oh, whoever got the scholarship has already been notified. You know what I did? I went to God and started praying. No, I didn't do that. I went into my room and cried. Because that was the thing that I had to do, and that was the thing, because it was like hope deferred. I was like, I had done all this thing in my life to get out of the country, and now I can't. But I'm out of my country. Did you see? Something changed, something worked. You know what? I think a decade later in my life, so I did all that when I was like 22. So I don't cry anymore, so don't worry about it. I do something. But anyways, I was 22 at that time, and it was only like when I was 32 or 33, I reflected back on my life. I was like, what was the worst day of my life was also the best day of my life. You know why? If God has given me that scholarship, I'll probably be in the US. I'll probably be living my own life. I wouldn't be here preaching and talking to you. I wouldn't be married to my beautiful wife, Bonnie. And I surely wouldn't be a disciple.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have you as my friends and family. I wouldn't have all that. What was the worst day of my life was also the best day of my life.
Come on. Come on.
So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that throughout the good, bad, and the ugly, God has a greater purpose of you.
Yeah. Come on.
Today we have our brother Daniel who is embracing this greater purpose. Daniel is going to get baptized today. But going back to the story, right? I know life is tough. I know life can be hard. I know life can be complicated.
Come on.
One day you'll have the best day of life. You're cruising around, you're flying high, and the next day life slaps you and drops you down on the ground. In mud, probably. And a lot of bird poo, if you're lucky. A lot of bad things happen in life, right?
Yeah.
Life is a lot of things. It can be scary. It can be thrilling. It can be full of twists and turns. But you better believe life is not boring.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I have 3 examples for you. Imagine sitting on a roller coaster. All it does is goes like this. Nothing happens. Would you sit on the roller coaster? No, it's boring. You will? Okay, that's all right. That's all right, bro. Okay, I have another example for you. Imagine sitting through a movie where nothing happens. All you see is somebody typing on their computer all day. How boring would that movie be? Nobody would want to watch that movie. Imagine a game with no action, like a sport. I don't know, anybody know about cricket? People know what cricket is? Okay. So for those of you who don't know, or Americans, my wife is American, so I can say that. Cricket is a cooler version of baseball. So all of you who don't know, there was like Pakistan was playing India in the World Cup, and it was a thrilling match. Pakistan was almost winning until India actually won. It's okay, Raj, it's okay. We'll win next time. We'll win next time. But anyways, I was thinking the reason why that game was so thrilling, and the reason why that game was so exciting, because it was full of twists and turns. It was unpredictable. You did not know what was going to happen. Anything could happen. How would your life be if nothing changes? You know what happens to water if it stays the same? It starts to smell. That's why if you're ever walking around in the bushes, always drink from flowing water. That will be your life if nothing happens and nothing changes. It becomes stale and boring. That's not what God wants for us.
Come on.
Again, as humans, we are programmed to change. Change is within our DNA.
Yeah.
A very, very good, simple, practical, easy to understand example is us aging. We have no control over it. Right? You grow older each and every year, whether you're happy or sad, you're still gonna grow.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether you accept it or not, whether you kick your feet or whatever, you're still gonna grow.
Yeah.
Another example is our emotional resilience. You know, I was telling you about crying. I cry less now. Over time, we are meant to grow emotionally and physically because change is in our DNA. So humans are programmed to change. So why don't embrace the changes in your life? I really like this quote from a really famous guy. You might know him. His name is Thanos. Yeah, very, very good philosopher. So you know what he said? He said, what did he say? Does anybody know? I'm inevitable, right? Similar to that, change is also inevitable, whether you embrace it or not.
Come on.
Both good and bad experiences in life help us grow.
Yeah.
I hate to say this. I really don't want to say this, but bad experiences more so.
Yeah.
It's totally up to us to embrace the challenges in life as an adventure, full of learnings and fun, and make the best out of it, or become angry at a situation and give up and stop living at all. When you have no control over your situation, how do you react? You can't control the situation, but you can definitely control how you react to that situation.
Right. Yeah. Come on.
A very good example, which is totally unrelatable to me, but I'll say it anyway. I'll say life is like surfing. So confession, I can't swim. I was even talking to Len and Kira, and I was like, maybe I can take swimming lessons with Micah. It will be pretty embarrassing. But at least I'll be able to swim to save myself. Nevertheless, life is like surfing on a surfboard. You can either ride with the waves and enjoy and be like, man, this is the best experience of my life.
Yep.
Or you can let the water drown you.
Well, come on.
It can be hard to handle the challenges of your life on your own.
Yep.
I won't tell you to toughen up because I can't, and so I won't. Otherwise, I'll be a hypocrite. But there's a big but. But with God, everything is possible.
Come on, Obaid.
You can even feel peaceful and joyful through the most troubling times of your life, only and only if you have God by your
That's
side.
right. Yeah. Come on.
So how do you react to challenges of your life?
Come on.
Do you walk around moody? Critical each other? Do you get irritated? Do you get angry? How do you deal with it?
Come on.
Do you lean on yourself and be like, I'm the great Obaid, I can do it on my own? I don't do that. No, I don't. Or do you rely on your resources? You're like, oh, I've got money, I've got education, I can use it. Or do you go like, my friends will save me. I've got really good friends, I've got a great emotional network, they'll always be there for me. Or is your first instinct, I'll go to God. In Ephesians chapter 3 verse 20 it says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. So point one, I took the story of Joseph, right? So, a lot of us knows Joseph as the dreamer. In the world, the dreamer has a very negative connotation. But in Bible, it doesn't. But today, I'm not focusing on Joseph being the dreamer. I'm choosing Joseph, another aspect of Joseph, which is something that a lot of religious scholars have explored. So the word that religious scholars have used for Joseph is called Sadiq. Sadiq means the righteous one. The reason why Joseph is attributed as the righteous one because he always did what was right and he valued his relationship with God over everything else in his life. He's a great example of staying righteous in every situation. When he had plenty, when he had nothing, when he was free, and even when he was enslaved.
Come on.
He saw God at work in good and bad times. He went from a beloved son to a prisoner and never ever complained. His motto in life was, why me, God? No, his motto in life was not, why me, God? Why are you giving me a hard time? But his motto in life was, I saw what you did there, God. He truly believed that God was always with him and using him to advance his cause. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Do you see God's hand in everything that happens? I can tell you, it's very easy to see God works when things are going well in your life.
Yeah.
You're like, man, I see God is working, God is blessing me, God is sorting out everything, God is giving me money, God has given me a girlfriend. But it's really hard to imagine God being there when life is going downhill.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you believe God is always there, or do you believe God is only there in good times?
Come on. Come on.
Joseph always focused on pleasing God rather than complaining about his circumstances, and is a great example to imitate in our day-to-day life. He stayed spiritual in every situation because he knew that this is what pleased God. There is a great saying that, I really love this saying. It says, two things define you: patience through nothing and attitude when you have everything.
Wow.
In Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 to 23, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Joseph had all these things. Joseph surely had the fruits of the Spirit. So when life gets hard, are you focused on pleasing God, or are you focused on throwing yourself a party? Not a regular party, but a pity party. He was loved by his parents, and God spoke to him through dreams. When I think about God speaking through dreams, the thing that comes into my mind is the movie Final Destination. Oh. So God gave him foresight, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want that. It's pretty hard, it's pretty tough, but for some odd reason, he was able to handle all that responsibility. Joseph, so let's look at Joseph and a little bit of history about Joseph. So Joseph was born in Jacob, also called Israel's family line. So Jacob is also known as Israel. And he was born to Rachel, his wife, after many, many years of infertility. So you can imagine Joseph was a really, really special child. He was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and he was named Joseph by Rachel, meaning God will increase. He was honest without any fear of men or sentimentality. And as you can see in the passage, he had no problems as being labeled uncool or snitch. That's what he loved to do. I mean, for me, personally, I've always had a problem with that. I was like, oh, it's really, really uncool to tell on people. It's not cool at all. But apparently, God doesn't seem to have any problem with that. So it doesn't really matter what I feel. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, it says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah and the son of Zilpah, his father's wife, when he brought their father a bad report about them. So that's how they introduced Joseph. I mean, in one way you can think that why is this guy like being a snitch? But in another way, it seems that his father trusted him, right? And then he was always honest and truthful, and his father knew that he'll always speak the truth.
Yeah.
He was also loved by his dad, but hated by his brother. He didn't seem a least bit bothered about it. Like the scriptures don't say that it bothered him. It didn't. Because he still did the right thing because he was righteous. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 3 to 4, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. I mean, this explains why he did that, right? Because he had been born into him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. I mean, it's hard when everybody around you hates you for the very thing that you stand for. It's righteous and being honest and being truthful, right? But it seemed he didn't care about it. He still did what was right in the sight of God. He saw dreams which were given to him from God. And the other thing we know is that he had no filter. I mean, a lot of brothers and sisters may make you uncomfortable because you don't know what they can say or what they will say because it's very unexpected. But I think in this case, you can see that because Joseph was doing and saying all that, he did that for a righteous reason. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 7, in Genesis chapter 37, it says, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. I mean, he didn't have any self-restraint, but I think it was for a good reason, because he wanted to speak what God had spoken to him. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So you can see that Joseph always spoke the truth. Joseph's incredible life is full of ups and downs and gives us many great insights into staying righteous. But today we'll look at two practical ways of how we can stay righteous and die saved too. So point 2, be close to God through the worst of times. When people go through worst times or bad times, they become rebellious. They blame others for their problems. They're contemptuous towards God. They latch on to sin for temporary relief and become self-focused. I think this is a characteristic of weak men because that's the easy way out. It's super easy to do that. It is during tough times that you're the most likely to drift away from God. And this is when you need to be the closest to Him. It seems counterintuitive, but if you don't want to pray, that is the time when you should pray. If you don't want to evangelize, that's the time when you should evangelize.
That's right.
It's the time when you don't want to be giving, that's the time when you should be giving. Joseph was obedient even when he was hated by everyone. How do you feel about being hated by everyone? Would you still do God's work? Or would it bother you too much? In Genesis chapter 37, verse 12 to 13, it says, now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. You know what he said? Very well. That's it. His response was just yes, with no excuse whatsoever. Imagine how his brothers were treating them. He already knew they hated him. He already knew what he was going to do. He already knew he will come back to a very hostile environment. But you know what he said? He said yes. No excuse. He didn't say, oh man, I don't feel like it. He didn't say, I don't want to deal with them. He didn't say, why don't you send somebody else? He didn't say, I've done it enough times already. He didn't say, why does it have to be me every single time? Which one of these is you? Or is it all of them?
Come on. Well.
I mean, a great brother that I want to lift up is our brother Jason. You know why? I think Jason is a very prime example of saying yes. He says yes to everything. He has no excuses. Whether it be cyber ministry, whether it be learning redacting from Mel and Elias, whether it be leading a Bible talk, if I ask him to speak to somebody, he'll just say yes to everything and never ever saying no. We can also see that he was brave, trustworthy, and disciplined to follow instructions. How are you with following instruction, or do you think you know best? I mean, I've a lot of times thought I know best, but then I realized I didn't. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." So God has already given you that Spirit. Are you really channeling that Spirit? Are you really flexing that Spirit that God has given you? When you're challenged to do something difficult, how do you react? I mean, for me, I would say, I'll be honest with you, and I'll be vulnerable and confess, that I find it really hard to follow instructions to the T. My brain is just not programmed to be like that. I think I'm naturally a very, very rebellious person. But you know what? Good part is coming, good part is coming. Don't worry. Good part is coming. But you know what? I'm working on it.
You are.
Can I do it on my own?
Come on, Obaid.
Can I do it on my own? No. But with God, I definitely can. So my question to you is, are you obedient to somebody who disciples you? Are you obedient to your sector leaders? Or you be like, hey, why is this guy making my life so hard? Are you obedient to your church leaders, or do you think they are just like burying you down in responsibilities and in things to do? So my challenge to you today is, of course you should do this for the rest of your life, but my challenge to you today is, try saying yes to all the biblical commands of your leaders this week. Give it a try. Give it a go and see how it changes your life. Because I have this really, really big conviction. If somebody tells you to do something and that doesn't feel right, and you still do it, do you believe that God is sovereign?
Right. Oh, yeah.
God is always sovereign. So if they give you bad advice, it would not work. But if they give you good advice and you don't do it, how about that? You might miss out on something that you were supposed to do.
That's right. Yeah.
Because God is still sovereign.
Yeah.
So my challenge is, do that this week. He was completely surrendered and knew God was in control. He was brave and confident in God. You know, the example that comes to my mind when I'm thinking of this point is our brother Edgar.
Come on, Edgar.
You know why? I mean, a lot of people don't know, but Edgar is just really, really awesome. He's just waving right there. He's this really, really awesome brother in Bondi, right? So a couple of months back, he was struggling with his visa. He didn't have enough money. And he was like, you know what I'm going to do? And I was asking him, like, hey, bro, like, let's see how we can help you. And you know what he said to me? He said, you know what I'm going to do? And I'm like, what are you going to do, Edgar? He said, I'm going to go to Joe, and I'm going to spend 1 week with Joe. And I'm like, why do you want to spend 1 week with Joe? He said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask him to train me how to lead a mission team so I can actually go to Ecuador and plant a church. I mean, whether or not God has chosen Edgar to do that, we don't know that. But I think just his heart of being brave, confident, and completely surrendered to everything, like I really want to lift you up for that, bro. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 23 to 24, it says, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So cistern is like a fancy word for well. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 28, it says, so while he was in the well, this is another thing that happens. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. I mean, it's really, really strange for me that the Bible doesn't say that he struggled. He fought with them. And he was like, why are you doing these guys? Yeah. Or he's not like, God, save me. It shows no sign of struggle. It almost seems like they were like, oh, Joseph, go into the well. And Joseph was like, sure, I'm going into the well. Right. And then they're like, okay, Joseph, now it's time for you to be sold. He was like, sure, I'll go get sold. There's no struggle whatsoever. I mean, that's like next level spirituality where you know God is in control and God is going to save you. In Psalm chapter 118 and verse 6, it says, the Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me?
Right.
Do you believe that?
Come on.
A good practical way to think about it is, are you surrendered to God in your dating life? Or are you hustling left, right, and center to start dating? He took every situation as an opportunity rather than a challenge from God. My question to you is, do you see an opportunity in every challenge, or do you see a challenge in every opportunity? Where do you stand today? In Genesis chapter 39, verse 1, it says, "Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." Genesis chapter 39, verse 4 to 5, later it says, "Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of Egyptian because of Joseph." The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. I mean, if you think of Joseph's character, he didn't take his present life circumstances to define his future. I mean, he could have been like, "Hey, why do I need to report to this guy who doesn't even believe in God, who's like putting all these things with me?" I mean, you can see here really good work ethic. I mean, sometimes even in your life, you can feel like you're in a hole. Like nothing seems to change. There's nothing, like God is not listening to your prayer. You keep on praying every day. You keep on getting advice. You keep on doing the right thing, but nothing changes. You don't see any way to get out of a situation. I mean, a good example is, for example, people might think, "I'll never get a job. I'll never get a permanent resident in Australia, or I'll never have a girlfriend." I was like that. Maybe not the last girlfriend part, but I'm just kidding. I was definitely like that. I was definitely like that. He was diligent even when he was a slave, and showed that he had great work ethic. And most importantly, when he started, he would not have known what would happen. I mean, if you think about it, Joseph would have never known that he'll end up becoming like a viceroy of Egypt. He just kept on working hard. These days, we are not enslaved, but a lot of time we can be enslaved by our emotions. So when you get enslaved by your emotions, your feelings, or when your life gets hard, do you become lukewarm for God? Or do you try to keep the same quality of God that you had before?
Come on.
I mean, an excellent example of that is our brother Elias. I mean, one thing that I've seen Elias, like Bonnie and I have been spending a lot of time with Elias and Mel, is Elias is really, really great at mastering his emotions. Like we had a rocky start, Elias, is that all right? A little bit of a rocky start. But I think over time, Elias has just grown and grown and grown.
Yeah.
No matter what happens in his life, he's like, "It's a choice. I'm fine. It's a choice. I choose to be happy today. I don't choose to be sad." And that's what Elias says. And no wonder God has blessed Elias's household with Mel. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, it says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters." It's really easy for us to understand that, "Oh, this means my job." But have you ever actually applied this to church? Have you ever thought that my Bible talk leader is my humanly master? I should listen to him. I should work diligently. Or in the church, do you take people for granted? And you only keep the good part for people outside the church. Let's consider special. So special is something that can be an opportunity and challenge for somebody. Does your bank account feel like Titanic today? Ready to hit the iceberg of special contribution?
Oh, no.
Does it feel like a challenge like that? Or do you see it as an opportunity to be disciplined with your finances? I mean, Bonnie and I were doing the math the other day and we realized that I know each and everybody is supposed to contribute around $1,500 to church every year to help plant the missions in other countries. I mean, we did the math and it's actually like saving $4 a day. That's it.
Wow.
It's just a coffee.
Come on.
If you save a coffee's worth every day, you would have made you special by the end of the year.
Wow.
It's not a lot. And if you think on the upside, on the positive side, not only like raising money for special, not only teach you hustling skills to make more money, it also teaches you how to be good with your finances. It teaches you discipline, how to save money. And these skills actually transcend when you're married and when you have kids too. So there are lots and lots of upsides to just saving special. And you know what's the most important thing? It makes you outward focused. No amount of money in the world can make you outward focused. You can be like, "Hey, I'm very selfish, help me." You cannot get out of it. You can pay millions and millions of dollars, you can't do that. But doing a very, very simple and small thing in the church, it teaches you how to be outward focused and unselfish. He didn't take the easy way out of his circumstances. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 7 and 9, it talks about a lot of temptations that he was going through. And in the Bible it says, "And after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said to him, 'Come to bed with me.' But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to me with care. No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? In Genesis chapter 39, verse 17 to 20, it shows the aftermath of his decision. It says, then she told him this story to her husband, who was the master. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed to help and left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house, when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me? He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. There's a saying that difficult road often lead to beautiful destinations. And Joseph here chose the difficult road. He didn't fall into temptation. He didn't think, oh yeah, I can't date in the church, maybe I can date outside the church. It's easier. Less parameters, less boundaries. Maybe my life would be easier if I'm not part of the church. I'll have so much free time. He didn't say, I can have and save more money and I can go bowling. He didn't say that. I mean, I've had all these thoughts, but there's a scripture that helps you fight that. In Psalm chapter 84, verses 10 to 12, it says, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere.
Come on.
I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked.
Oh, yeah.
Do you value the comfort or lure of sin, or do you value being right with God?
Come on. Come on.
A very good practical way to think about it. Do you run away from your bed like Joseph in the morning for your quiet times? Or do you give into the temptation on sleeping on your bed? He was focused on loving people rather than asking to be loved. I mean, you can see that in Genesis chapter 40, verse 4 to 8. It says, the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw them, they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in the master's house, why do you look so sad today? We both had dreams, they answered, but there's no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. So I mean, if you think about it, while Joseph himself was a prisoner, he cared for people and wanted to listen to them, rather than talking about how hard his life is.
Come on.
Right? Sometimes a simple question like, are you okay? How are you doing? Is all that people need.
Yeah.
That's all they want. Are you afraid to ask that question because you think the brother and sister will start opening up and you'll have to sit through all that? Do you get worried about it? Or do you actually ask them how they're doing? Are you applying these principles in your marriage, in your household, in your discipling relationships? I mean, the interesting thing to know is that he helped them knowing that they cannot help him back. Again, his heart was not outcome focused. His heart was focused on the right thing. Let's quickly go to point 3. Point 3, which is kind of like an extension of point 2, is that when the good times are there, or be even closer to God through the best of times. So you need to be close to God in the worst of times and need to be even closer to God through the best of times.
Come on.
When people go through the good times, they forget God's mission.
Yeah.
They become arrogant, they're less considerate, they become selfish, rebellious, even sometimes let the pleasures of the world take them away from God. In good times, do you feel like, I'm the man, I did it on my own? Or do you humble brag as a Christian that I used my God-given talents to make it happen? It is during these times when you need to hold on to God as hard as you can, because this is when Satan will most likely attack. Let me ask you today, are you focused on good times or are you focused on godly times?
All right.
Wow.
Because I know my answer, and if your answer is not godly time, you need to repent.
Come on, Obaid.
Joseph evangelized and kept God at the forefront of his mind when he was going through good times. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 14 to 16, it says, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it is said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. I mean, if you think about it, Joseph had an incredible opportunity. And rather than using his talent to say, hey Pharaoh, you should take me out of prison, give me a good life, he used it to evangelize to him about God.
Yeah.
I mean, think Pharaoh. He never knew about God. He didn't know who God was, but he evangelized.
Come on.
Each and every one of you is talented today. I'd be surprised if somebody says, I'm not talented at all. Each and every one of you has a God-given talent. The question is, do you use it for God or His people, or you just keep it to yourself? I mean, I know Mark has been lifted up a lot of times, and I want to lift up Mark. I think Mark has an incredible skill of cooking. Would Joe agree? Right? So Mark is an incredible brother, and all he does is using his talent of cooking to help other Christians and people in the church. And he expects nothing in return. So my challenge to you today is to identify a talent that you have and speak to your sector leader about it so that it can be used for God. A couple of other things about Joseph. He was humble and did not boast about his God-given intelligence. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 33, it says, "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, to be kept in the cities for God." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all these things known to you, there is no one discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all the people are submit to your orders. Only with respect to throne will I be greater than you." I mean, he humbled himself and lifted God up. If you're smart, if you're good looking, if you're skilled, let me give you a shocker. It has nothing to do with you. It is all God-given, or a result of some genetic lottery which you won, which again God controls. So why don't you thank God for it? In chapter 1 Peter chapter 5 to 6, it says, "Humble yourself therefore under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time." Also, when he was given responsibility, he didn't freak out, but he knew God will help him. Do you freak out when you're given more responsibility? Do you say you should give it to somebody else? I can't do it. I mean, as we sort of like coming to a close of point 2, I mean, we can see that he was very forgiving. I mean, we see that what happened in the later part of the scriptures is that his brothers who hated him, who sold him, they actually have to come back to him because he was this viceroy of Egypt, and he had a lot of grain to actually buy grain from him. I mean, if you see in Genesis chapter 45, verse 4 to 5, it says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you.'" Amen. He didn't take revenge of his siblings' vulnerable situation, but rather he comforted them and provided assurance. I mean, this is the next level of care. Are you still waiting to be comforted, or are you comforting other people? He reflected on how God used his hardships to get him to where he is now. So my challenge to you today is, do you harbor feelings towards other brothers or sisters? If you do, I'd say get open about it and resolve it. Otherwise, it'll keep on eating you like a slow and deadly poison on the inside. Because all bad feelings do is hurt you and nobody else. He used his talent and status to help make the lives of his brothers and sisters better. In Genesis chapter 47, verses 11 to 12, it says, "So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his fathers and brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children." He used his status for the good of his family rather than benefiting himself. In Luke chapter 16, verse 9, it says, "I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." How are you using your status, wealth, and blessings to advance your spiritual family? It's quite easy to do it for your actual family, but it's a bit challenging to do it for your spiritual family. But you know what? It's more noble to do it for your spiritual family. Do you give benevolence? Or does something happen to your heart when benevolence comes to you? Do you hang out with other Christians on dates? Are you still waiting for others to do the same to you? He was still obedient when he was viceroy. In Genesis chapter 47, verse 29 to 30, it says, "When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, 'I have found favor in your eyes. If I found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. I will do as you said,' he said." So his response was again, "Sure, yes, no problem." He didn't let being viceroy get to his head. Amen. Do worldly blessings make you arrogant today? Independent or self-focused? Do you feel special when you become fruitful or be appointed as a leader, or when you get an excellent job or get accepted into a hard degree or graduate? I mean, the last kind of like key point, which I'm really, really passionate about, and which is a bit hard to do, but not impossible with God. He was faithful till death. And he even used his death to remind people of God's mission. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 24 to 25, it says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of his land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.' And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, 'God surely will come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place.' He believed in God's mission even until the last of his breath. Do you believe it today, or have you forgotten about it?
Come on.
Have the worries of life taken it away from you? Is something else in your heart than God's mission? In Matthew chapter 28, verse 19 to 20, which is a good reminder of what our mission is, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of age." What are you doing to stay righteous today, during both good and bad times? Do you still believe in God's promise? Do you pray about it? Do you act on it? If not, don't worry, because you can always start today. In conclusion, Joseph was like a lot of times we attribute Joseph being the dreamer, but if you can see, Joseph was also the righteous one. And the good thing about Joseph is that he stayed too close to God, even through the worst time of his life, and even through the best time of his life.
Yeah.
And to God all be the glory.
Come on.